Seasons of Maple Ridge. Betty Collins stood in front of the old White House on Hickory Lane with a suitcase in one hand and her late brother's letter in the other. A soft September breeze stirred the dry leaves on the ground and carried the faint scent of apples from the nearby orchard. The house looked smaller than she remembered, like an old friend who had shrunk with age but still smiled the same. She hadn't seen this place in over 50 years, not since the summer she left for college in Chicago, vowing never to return for more than a weekend. That weekend turned into decades. Life happened: marriage, children, widowhood, grandchildren, and retirement. But Maple Ridge, the town she'd once called too quiet, too small, waited patiently for her return. Now, at 76, she was back. She looked down at the note her brother James had written before his passing. The key is still under the mat. Some things never change. Betty gave a small chuckle, the kind that rises more from memory than amusement, and bent slowly to lift the faded welcome mat. Sure enough, there it was, a rusty old key with a worn leather tag that said, "Home." The front door creaked open like it was exhaling after a long nap. She stepped inside, and the house greeted her with a familiar smell: cedarwood, old books, and just a trace of something floral. Probably the potpourri their mother always kept by the stairs. It was like walking into a photograph. The same floral wallpaper in the hallway. The same wooden clock that had ticked through storms and holidays. On the living room wall still hung a picture of her and James at ages 6 and 9, arms slung around each other, grinning with gaps in their teeth. She let her suitcase drop softly to the floor and wandered into the kitchen. James had lived here alone for the past 20 years, ever since his knees got too bad for carpentry and he gave up his workshop. He never married, never left town. Said he liked the stillness too much. Betty made herself a cup of tea and stood by the window overlooking the backyard. The big oak tree still stood tall in the center of the lawn. She could almost hear the echoes of their childhood: bare feet on the grass, lemonade on hot days, and the sound of screen doors slamming shut. This house had held so much of their lives. And now it was hers. She didn't know yet whether she'd stay for good, but something in her bones told her this wasn't just a short visit. It felt more like the beginning of something new. She looked around the room again and whispered to herself, "All right, James. Let's see what you left behind." The next morning, Betty woke up to the sound of blue jays chattering outside the bedroom window. The mattress was firm, the air cool, and the sheets still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. James had kept the place tidy, almost too tidy, like a man who lived in quiet routine and rarely moved things once they were in place. She sat up slowly, her joints protesting the sudden movement, and let her feet find the floor. It had been decades since she'd slept in this room. It was once her parents' room, later James's, and now hers by circumstance. Downstairs, the kettle whistled gently as she made her tea, this time adding a splash of milk the way she used to. She brought her mug to the front porch and sat on the creaky wicker chair, the morning sun cutting through the cool air. Across the street, nothing much had changed. Same white fence at the Murphy house, same tall pine tree in Mrs. Walker's yard. Maple Ridge was the kind of town that aged without changing. It wore its years like a favorite cardigan, frayed at the cuffs, a little faded, but comforting. The downtown still had the same diner, the same barbershop, and probably the same barber. It was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and kids rode bikes without helmets. Her quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching. A car was pulling up, a navy blue pickup, clean but clearly well used. It parked in the driveway, and out stepped a tall man in his late 70s, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and an easy smile. "Betty Collins," he said, walking up to the porch. Betty squinted. "Depends who's asking." The man chuckled. "Ray Halstead. Sheriff. Retired. I used to sit 2 rows behind you in Mr. Purdy's chemistry class. Back in, 1963. Betty blinked, then laughed. "Ray Halstead. Well, I'll be. You got old." "So did you," he grinned. "But you wear it better." She motioned to the empty chair beside her. "Coffee?" "Wouldn't say no." They sat in easy silence for a while, sipping from mismatched mugs and watching the sun rise higher over the rooftops. "So," Ray said finally, "word around town is you're back for good." Betty raised an eyebrow. "I've been here less than 24 hours. And you already heard. Maple Ridge may be small, but the grapevine's fast. People were real fond of James. Sorry for your loss, by the way." She nodded. "Thanks. It still feels strange, being here without him." Ray leaned back in his chair. "Well, if you need anything, someone to fix a loose shingle, haul a box, or just talk, I'm not far. Town's quiet, but we take care of each other." Betty smiled gently. "I might take you up on that." Before he left, Ray tipped his cap and said, "You might want to drop by the library sometime. I hear they're about to shut it down. Shame, really. I figured if anyone could save it, it'd be a schoolteacher like you." After he drove away, Betty sat on the porch a little longer, stirring her tea and watching a leaf fall gently from the old oak tree in the yard. She hadn't planned on getting involved in anything. But the idea of the library closing, that hit her in a place she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe this visit was going to be more than just a quiet goodbye to the past. Maybe it was the start of something unexpected. After breakfast, Betty wandered out to the backyard with a light sweater over her shoulders. The morning mist had faded, leaving behind that golden kind of light that only comes with early autumn. The grass was longer than it should have been, and wildflowers had taken over what used to be a neat little garden plot. But what caught her eye most was the swing. The old wooden swing still hung from the massive limb of the oak tree, the same tree that had been planted by her grandfather sometime in the 1920s. Time had thickened its trunk and gnarled its branches, but the swing hung there faithfully, its ropes weathered but strong. Betty stepped closer and ran her fingers along the wood of the seat. Her name was still there, carved in childish scrawl with a pocket knife decades ago. Betty plus James, 1952. A wave of memory washed over her. Bare feet running across the grass, the smell of watermelon, cicadas buzzing in the background, and the laughter that only belonged to summer evenings. James used to push her on that swing until the sky turned pink and their mother called them in for dinner. She hadn't thought of that in years. She sat on the swing slowly, testing it. The ropes creaked, but it held. Gently, she pushed off with her feet and let herself rock back and forth. It wasn't the same thrill as when she was 8 years old, but the rhythm, the view of the sky through the leaves, the sound of birds, all of it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She closed her eyes and let the wind lift strands of her hair. She could almost hear James laughing again, almost see her father tending to the garden, and her mother waving from the kitchen window with a dish towel in hand. But the swing slowed, and the present settled back around her. The breeze shifted, and with it came the sound of a lawnmower starting up a few houses down. She opened her eyes and noticed a figure standing at the back fence. A girl, maybe 14, thin, in a worn hoodie and jeans, watching her with one eyebrow raised. "You gonna fall off that thing?" the girl called. Betty chuckled. "Not unless the tree gives out." The girl grinned and pushed her bangs out of her eyes. "I'm Ava. I live next door. You're the dead guy's sister." Betty smiled, a little amused at the bluntness. "That's me. I'm Betty. Your brother used to give me tomatoes. I hate tomatoes, but he kept bringing them over." "That sounds like James." There was a beat of silence. "You staying long?" Ava asked. "I'm not sure yet," Betty replied. "Depends how the house treats me." Ava shrugged. "It's a nice house. Needs a new gutter, though." Betty smirked. "You handy with a hammer?" Ava grinned. "You'd be surprised." They stood there looking at each other, two people from different ends of life's road, but somehow understanding one another. "Well," Betty said, standing up, "if you ever want to talk, or if you ever want to unload some of those tomatoes, I'm around." Ava gave a nod and disappeared behind the fence. Betty turned back to the swing and looked up at the oak tree. It had stood through storms, birthdays, heartbreaks, and decades of change. Maybe it wasn't just the house that had waited for her to return. That afternoon, as Betty was sorting through a box of old photographs in the dusty living room, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she shuffled to the door and opened it to find a woman standing there with a familiar face, though softened by time. "Betty Collins?" the woman asked, her eyes bright behind a pair of tortoiseshell glasses. "Yes, that's me," Betty replied, trying to place the face. "I'm Helen Morris. I lived across the street when we were kids." Betty smiled warmly. "Helen. Of course, I remember you. It's been years." Helen stepped inside, carrying a small tin box. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I brought something for you." She handed Betty the box gently. Betty set the photos aside and took the tin, feeling its surprising weight. "What is it?" she asked. Helen smiled wistfully. "Something James wanted you to have. I found it in his workshop last week." With trembling hands, Betty opened the box. Inside were a collection of old letters, some folded carefully and tied with ribbons, others loose but still legible. She pulled one out, the paper fragile but the ink clear. The handwriting was unmistakably James's. "Dear Betty, I hope this letter finds you well. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around. There are things I never told you, memories I hoped you'd understand one day. I want you to know how proud I am of you, even if life took us in different directions." Betty's throat tightened. She sank into her favorite chair, the letters spilling gently onto her lap. Helen sat beside her quietly. "James was a good man," she said softly. "He always talked about you. Said you were the one who got away." Betty shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I thought I was the one who left." Helen reached over and squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the past finds us when we least expect it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to listen." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as Betty read the letters. Pages filled with stories she hadn't known, apologies, regrets, and love unspoken for decades. She looked up at Helen. "I think Maple Ridge still has some stories left for me." Helen smiled. "And I think you're just the one to tell them." The next few days were a slow unraveling of the past. Betty found herself spending hours in the attic, a dusty, cobwebbed space she hadn't set foot in since childhood. The wooden beams creaked underfoot, and the air smelled of old paper and forgotten things. Among the boxes stacked against the far wall, she discovered a battered leather trunk. With a deep breath, she pulled it into the light and pried open the heavy lid. Inside were stacks of letters, journals, and faded photographs tied together with twine. Some letters were addressed to James, some to her parents, and others to a woman named Eleanor, a name Betty didn't recognize. One letter caught her eye. It was postmarked 1970, written in a delicate hand. "Dear James, I never stopped thinking about you. Every time I hear the wind in the trees, I remember that summer we spent together. Maybe someday we'll find our way back to each other. Eleanor." Betty sat back, heart pounding. Who was Eleanor? And why had James kept these letters hidden for so long? She spent the evening reading through the correspondence, piecing together a story she hadn't known existed, a story of love, loss, and choices made under the weight of small-town expectations. As the sun set and shadows filled the attic, Betty realized that the house, and her brother's life, held secrets waiting to be understood. That night, she dreamed of letters flying through the sky, each one carrying a whisper of the past she was only beginning to hear.